Hello, everyone. It is 10 o'clock on Saturday night, Eastern Time. I am Chris Weave. This is not Pat Doyle. This is Peter Gold. Pat Doyle is unavailable this evening, although he's feeling much, much better. I was going to wait and I was hoping that he'd be on tonight so I could say, hey, Pat, how was COVID? Because that's what he had, but he's doing fine, and his family's fine. He just had like some cold-like symptoms. He popped a positive test and couldn't work for a while. So in any event, we got Peter Gold decided to come back because I asked him to, and he said yes. And we're going to talk a little bit more about Merchant Marine stuff, and specifically, we're going to talk about the ship he was on. But before we get to that, Peter is actually going to change history here on Starfleet Tactical, because we were talking before the show and he said that there actually is an employer that he can speak for. So who is it?
Pequod Freight Group. It's a merchant company in the universe based out of the planet Pequod in Talbot Quadrant.
So they don't actually pay you.
No.
And you're pretty much the only employee, right?
No, we have a chapter. So we technically, I guess we have a bunch of people.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good. Yeah. That's good. And you know, there was a time period where I could say that I spoke for Bu 9, which I guess is technically an employer, since I did actually at some point get some money because of work I did with Bu 9. I figured out one time I made the princely sum of $879.25 for my work at Bu 9, and it only cost me about $5,000 to earn that money. So, you know, I lose money on every transaction, make it up in volume, that sort of deal. But other than that, for the record, I do not speak for any employer, past or present. And it is unlikely that I will speak for any future employer unless I happen to be self-employed at that point. So,
yep, same here.
All right. So public affairs people, take note of that. Didn't actually do anything, not speaking for you.
Nope.
So how's your week been?
Not bad. Pretty slow working on inventory at my real job. Doing some stuff for TRMN.
Okay.
So
when you say inventory, what sort of things are you inventorying?
Engineering spare parts mostly.
Okay, because the ship that you're currently on is the plan is to decommission it too, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
How many ships were in that class?
3.
So are they getting rid of all of them?
Yes. Yep, we're the last one to go. They sent the first one up the river on Tuesday.
How many of those spare parts are going to be useful for somebody else? Unclear, not your problem.
Very unclear, in part because it's from a mid-1980s steamship. So there's not very many steamships left. So that puts a kibosh on a lot of stuff. Even the equipment that is still modern and used, the values are so low and the paperwork so high that it's really not worth taking off. I mean, when the ship actually gets turned into rebar, they don't turn into razor blades, regrettably. Somebody will probably take all that stuff off, put it up on eBay, and there'll be somebody somewhere in the United States or the world that will say, oh, I do absolutely need that, rather than upgrading my 40-year-old piece of equipment. So, and they will pay through the nose for it.
So 1980s steamship, it must have been just about the last steamship built.
Yeah, the last era. Yeah.
Because everybody sort of went to most of the world had gone to diesels by that point, hadn't they?
Well, most of the world had gone to diesels long before that. And the United States kept to steamships in part based on the subsidy program. The United States government subsidized the construction cost up to 80% for all American-made components. There were no high horsepower diesel engines that were American-made. So, yeah. So, and when fuel prices started going up there, they found that it costs a lot of money to run a steam plant. Maybe.
Yeah.
A lot of it was based on pre-containerization numbers, though. So if you pull in a break bulk ship to the pier and you're going to sit Pierside for 3 weeks while you load and unload, you're going to burn a lot of fuel relative to your electrical needs. That if you were on a steamship, on a motor ship, you'd shut down the main propulsion and you'd only be running the diesel generator. So, don't know what would do. I don't know if anybody ever ran the numbers for a really large container ship. Except it may not have, the plant may be too big for a container ship.
Okay.
But it would have been an interesting analysis to say, well, yeah, though these ships are only in port for X number of hours, so just stay, you could stay up.
Yeah, the difference between cooling down and bringing it back up, it's like you'd never actually go cold in the amount of time you had in port, right?
Well, you never would go cold. Well, you might shut down one boiler if you're going to be in port for a week or two. But even then you probably weren't. But just the low level of the amount of steam that went in the fuel used just to make a little bit of electricity compared to the amount of fuel you'd use to make the same amount of electricity under a diesel engine. Just the support services. So.
Yeah, it's sort of like the equivalent of letting your car engine run just so you can listen to the radio.
Yeah.
So, okay. All right, that makes a lot of sense. So I think I told everybody last week that I had taken a tour of the ship that Peter was on before he went to his current ship, and I took a bunch of photos. I had 114 photos, of which about probably 4 were just junk because there was like a big crisp thumb in the way of the lens or something like that, or they were real blurry or something. So I took the photos that are left and put them all together, and we're going to go through that. So you may be asking yourself, if you're not a longtime viewer of the show and you stumbled into this thing called Starfleet Tactical, and you're listening to people talk about steamships versus diesel ships, et cetera, you may be wondering, like, okay, where's the Starfleet part of it? Where's the tactical part of it? And okay, we've always on this show, we've gone far afield, right? Starfleet Tactical is sort of like, that sort of describes the center of our axis of interest, but it's not by any stretch of the imagination a mission statement that we adhere to religiously, in part because we've always sort of had the idea that, the people that are interested in Starfleet tactics and stuff like that are interested in a bunch of different things. In part, it's because we think we can illustrate things like that by going a little bit farther afield. There's related topics next door to this that it's worth covering. And part of it is just that, if you want to understand how Starfleet and how science fiction space forces in general work, you have to understand a broad variety of things, right? And there's plenty of places out on the internet where you can go and you can watch people talk about, the Alcubierre drive and real world, experiments with fusion reactors and what does antimatter really get you for a space drive, et cetera, et cetera. doesn't really make any sense for Pat and I and whoever else we have on the show to spend a whole lot of time talking about the technical details of real world physics, even though we know some people who can do that. But the thing that like Pat and I have that we bring to the show and is that we know about navies and we know about science fiction, and we know about Star Trek in particular, Starfleet in particular, and we've spent a lot of time sort of with all those ideas running around in our head and mixing them up. And then occasionally we do things like we bring people like Peter on board because he can talk about some of the other pieces of this too that are related to this. Like we were talking beforehand, before the show, Peter and I had a little conversation. We've been actually logged on for about a half hour before we started. We had a little conversation where I said, hey, I'm going to talk about a bunch of this stuff. And one of the things you may recall that Peter last time referred to the idea of an $11 billion bottle of wine. That comes from an essay written by, I can't think of his name. He was an old SPI game designer. Went to West End Games, Greg Costician. Greg Costician did this article called The $11 billion Bottle of Wine. And it was a discussion about how hard it would be to actually ship stuff across interstellar distances. And it's a really cool article, although it has a bunch of assumptions built into it. And if your universe fits with those assumptions, it makes a lot of sense. Like we talked about last time when we talked about trade in the Honorverse. In the Honorverse, shipping is so cheap that it is canonically cost-effective to ship dirt across interstellar distances. If you need to get the right kind of dirt, you can import the right kind of dirt because it's so cheap to ship stuff. That's harder to say than it sounds. It's so cheap to ship stuff that you can import dirt. Now, if your FTL system is really, really expensive, it takes a long time to go distances. It's the Honorverse is pretty capital intensive, but the ships are huge, so they make it by having it all works because the denominator is so huge. But if your denominator isn't very huge and it's really expensive to ship stuff, etc., you're not going to be shipping dirt. And the other end of the spectrum away from that is what you see in the movie Avatar, where they basically say early on that the only stuff that's worth shipping in the galaxy is at their current level of technology is the unobtainium, the specific mineral that they find on that planet that's like a natural superconductor, that it's the only thing that it's worth going to that effort for. And the effort for that spacecraft is just tremendous. I mean, it's insanely expensive, but it's worth it for them to do that. So, like that's why in some science fiction backgrounds, like one of my favorites is the RPG River of Heaven, and that you don't ship stuff. You ship information, right? You ship designs. So the starship shows up and they beam down the design, or they'll sell you the design that's the latest that the engineering firm back on Earth has come up with, and then you 3D print that stuff based upon that design. And so they're shipping ideas. They're not shipping, dirt. So we're going to talk a little bit about the ship that Peter used to be on, and that is the Harry L. Martin. And we're going to talk about the Martin because it's an interesting ship. It's an interesting ship idea, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. In the meantime, the plan for tonight is first I'll do some announcements like I always do. We mentioned a couple of books last time, but I forgot to put up the slide, so I'm going to put up the slide. We're going to talk about Lash and CB very quickly. That's something else that I listed. And you know what? I totally forgot to finish this slide. Yeah, the couple of things I don't include, forget that stuff. The things I didn't include was actually talking about, there was something I forgot, is talking about what show we're going to watch for the watch along. and another thing that I wanted to talk about. Maybe I actually put those on the next slide. Let's see if I put those on the next slide. Yeah, I did, actually. Except I forgot to finish this slide too. I allowed myself to get distracted. So the watch along, let's go ahead and do Babylon 5. And so I haven't done Babylon 5 in forever. I think the last time I watched it was more than 10 years ago. We'll probably start discussing it in the month of June, because May is still really up in the air. I'm supposed to be traveling in May, but it may not happen, but it may happen, but it may get changed, but I don't know. So let's just skip the month of May for planning purposes, because I don't know how many shows we're going to end up doing in May. I'm definitely going to be out for some of May, but I'm not sure how much. So let's just plan that sometime in June. We'll announce it when we get a little bit closer. Sometime in June, we'll talk about Babylon 5. So start watching Babylon 5. And so that first season of Babylon 5 doesn't have a whole lot of spacecraft combat stuff in it. There's not a whole lot of meat to really get into on that stuff. So I tell you what, let's just plan that in the next 6 weeks, let's do the first. Why don't we do the first half of the first season of Babylon 5? I will try to figure out exactly how many episodes there are in that first season, but we'll go ahead and do the first half of the first season of Babylon 5. So that's what we're going to do. The second thing is there's a book reading option. So I've got on my list of things to do I want to do a couple of sessions on one of my favorite book series. It's the Exordium series by Sherwood Smith and Dave Trowbridge. Specifically the second edition of the Exordium series. It's found on Bookview Cafe, or you can get the ebook. It is not, the second edition is only available electronically. It's available on Audible. It's available on Kindle. It's available on Bookview Cafe. There are 5 books in the series. The first one is The Ruler of Naught. Sometime in the next couple of months, I'm going to plan on doing a presentation on it. So if you want to get a leg up and read this thing, feel free to go ahead and do that. And then I'll talk about how combat works in that universe. If you would prefer to wait until after I've done the combat thing, that's fine too. But I thought I would just toss it out there as an option. So the 10-second summary is, combat in that universe is what I call Gunkata with starships. If you've seen Equilibrium, the Kurt Wimmer movie Equilibrium, you know about Gunkata. The idea is that you have, between all the different capabilities you have, you're able to predict where the enemy is going to be, and you fire where you think the enemy is going to be. And that especially works in the situation that we have in the Exordium universe, where the sensors are all speed of light, but they've got a tactically useful FTL jump drive, and they're constantly dealing with sensor lag. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to fire your weapon so that when the starship appears, there will be an incoming round heading towards it. So you pop out, you fire a skip missile at a target that you think is going to be about 10 light seconds away, but you fire when you first get out. And it may or may not be there when you got out. It may or may not be there when the skip missile gets there, but you're constantly taking shots at places where you think the target is going to be. Which reminds me, there's been, that actually gives me an idea about another thing I should talk about. And that is Harris Lanning's Battleship Tactics article, which is something that I reread every now and then. And so I'll make a list, make a note to myself to talk about Harris Lanning's article too, because he talks about doing a similar thing with torpedoes. Okay, let's see. That's it for that. Usual caveats. Please read them. Okay. All right. So let's talk about Lash and CB. Peter is going to do probably the majority of the talking on this, but I'm going to give a little bit of context here. Lash and CB are similar in that they both are barge carriers. And so if you look at that image in the center, what you're looking at is the elevator on the stern of a ship. And the idea is that it lifts barges up and puts them on board the ship. In fact, if you look in the lower left-hand corner, you can see that yellow thing is a barge. The image above it, you can see the sort of rectangular barges there, and you can see that in the top ship too. The idea is that these are ships that you would use in places that don't have sophisticated port facilities. And I think if I remember correctly, Peter, isn't it the case that the difference between Lash and CB is that the Lash barges were unpowered and the CB barges were powered? Is that correct?
No, neither one was powered.
Okay.
They're different size barges, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
But not all that different. The real significance is whether you lift them up with a crane or you lift them up with an elevator, and then you move them fore and aft on what we call a transporter. It's a 46 wheeled electrohydraulic piece of equipment, one on each side of the ship for the CB or C barge system. Okay,
so what I should point out here is something that's sort of interesting in that they only made a handful of each of these ships worldwide, and Peter happened to serve on one of each, right?
Yes.
Which ships did you serve on?
I served on the Stonewall Jackson and on what at the time was the Cape May.
Okay.
It was a Mirror-Lex, I believe.
Mirror-Lex. Okay. All right. That sounds familiar. Yeah, these are ideas that never really caught on. But I was immediately intrigued by these because it seems to me that that in a science fiction background, in a starfaring background, this strikes me as exactly the sort of thing that you might want to send off to some place that is undeveloped, right? I know that they talked about having self-propelled barges. So the idea is that you'd leave the barge behind and it would sort of go tooling up to wherever it needed to go. You'd go to the mouth of the river and the barge would go to wherever it needed to go to deliver its stuff. And then eventually it would get picked up probably by the next ship that came by. And so if you think about it, I mean, that's the idea that you would sort of pack stuff up in a self-contained capability like that makes a lot of sense if you're dealing with, you've got your ship, your ships that are going to stay in orbit, and then you've got the other the landers or the atmospheric capable craft, etc. I mean, I have a tendency to look at the world through science fiction lenses anyway, and that's immediately what I thought about when I saw these things. So, how did the concept work out from where you were sitting?
It seemed to work okay. I think the problem was that you could only put about 40 barges on each one, roughly.
Okay.
They were steam powered, which meant that when the price of fuel went up, they just got cost prohibitive to run.
And how big were the barges?
For the Lash, I can't remember because that was back in college. The CB was 1,000 tons per barge because you could put two barges on the elevator, but you had a tear weight of, I think, 160 tons on the barge itself. So 840 tons of cargo per barge. Works good. When we pulled in for the Lash, we pulled into someplace in southern Jordan. I can't remember the name of the port. Somalia, Djibouti, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. You could drop them off and you could be out of town in under 36 hours.
Mm-hmm.
The tugboat would pull one away, put another one where you could grab it, pull it on board, and then they could unload at their leisure using a shoreside crane or even by hand, depending upon what it was packed with. So if you were talking relatively small boxes or bricks of rubber that were man carryable, just throw a ladder down there, and they just offload them. They just carry them in and out of the hold. Real low tech. But as soon as you start getting a container terminal with a specialized crane, or use a container ship that has its own crane, now you can put that on a truck, and you don't need stevedores or longshoremen to load and unload at the pier anymore.
Yeah.
So you can drive that whole thing off. I think if they had introduced it in the 50s and they hadn't come up with the container concept with McLean, it probably would have stuck around for a lot longer. Of course, our waterfront would look a lot different, because you want to still pull these ships into a World War II or earlier style port where you have warehouses along the side and you just unload into the warehouse. Or they even come up with a local small crane that lifts the barge up for some reason.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned container ships. Let me go to the next slide, because I mentioned these books the last time. We talked about them a little bit, but we didn't. I forgot to put the slide up. So here's the slide. One of the things, that the box, Levinson's book, also is not just about containers and the ships that containers created. It's also about the ports that containers created. The ports that were made and the ports that were broken by the box. New York City used to be a big port, and now it's not. Now the big port is Elizabeth, New Jersey, which was a swamp back into the 50s or 60s or whenever it was when they built it. And it used to be that you'd build your port. Your port would be near the factory, and the factory would be near the city, because that's where the people lived. But containerized shipping changed all that. You don't have to have the factory anywhere near where the shipping is. The factory just has to be near a rail line, and the rail line needs to go to the port. Having highways that went to the port so you could have trucks take stuff to the port too is nice. But if you got a rail line, you're set, right? So all the ports have these huge rail lines going in, and you see container after container after container coming through, going into the port. And so, it used to be that moving stuff from the factory in Brooklyn to the port was a huge pain in the ass, because you're driving a truck in New York City, and they just detoured around all of that. So shipping containers aren't just about what it did to ships. It's about what it did to ports, and in turn, what it did to cities. In the box, he talks about how New York City spent $1 gazillion building a brand spanking new port facility. They totally rebuilt it, etc., and they never opened it. If they partially opened like one pier, and it got next to no business, and they built this brand new port facility that never got used because everything went someplace else, and then they redeveloped all that stuff into like condos and businesses and stuff. So
yeah, and that's actually starting to bite us. We no longer have port facilities to put our reserve ships in.
Yeah, that's biting us. I actually blame the back in the 80s and 90s, the Base Relocation and Closure Act, the various BRACs, as they're called, um, decided that the right answer was to get rid of all the excess capacity that we had because we weren't using all these different facilities. So let's just get rid of them. My usual response when people start talking about getting rid of excess capacity is to ask them if they have a spare tire in the trunk of their car. Because that's a 25% excess capacity. Why don't you get rid of that spare tire? Why do you need that? You would get better fuel mileage if you didn't have that tire in your trunk. You could sell that tire and get some money back on it. It seems to me to be a no-brainer. Why would you have that? It's the same rationale. I don't think we should have gotten rid of any of those extra facilities, or at least we should have kept a lot of them, because once you got rid of it, it's gone, right? If you have to build a new one, you first have to find the land to build it, and then you get to build everything else. So, yeah, I agree with you there.
Yeah, the land and the pier space is really the bigger part. Even if they had just kept the waterfront area and let all the piers and everything else deteriorate into really not usable, they could have at least decided to redevelop and put new piers in and be better piers.
Yeah.
Expensive, but in a 30-year thing, you may actually save money between using it. But once you lose that land, it's hard to get back.
It is. It is. Very much so. Okay, let's talk about the Harry Martin. So here's some of the stats. These are images came from Wikipedia. All the other images, with one exception, other than there's all the images in this other than these two and one other image we'll get to later on, a drawing of a lifeboat, came from my cell phone when I went and did a tour of the Harry L. Martin. So now it says complement 39 mariners. That is a little deceptive because that is 39 merchant mariners like Peter. That does not include all the Marines that they would put on board to handle any equipment that they're carrying. It was a pre-positioning ship for a while, wasn't it?
Yes.
So basically it's adding Diego Garcia, if I remember correctly.
I think Diego. I wasn't on board at the time, so
yeah, that was a long time ago. So it basically sat in some place like Diego Garcia with a full hold of Army gear, probably Army gear, maybe Navy.
Yep, Marine.
It was Marines.
Yeah, because he was a Marine. He was a Marine.
Oh yeah. He was a Marine lieutenant. Okay, so full of Marine gear, because the idea with these pre-positioning ships is getting the dudes to the theater is pretty easy, right? You put them on airplanes, you fly them there, that's pretty easy. It's their gear that takes forever. So rather than wait for them to load their gear and move it across the ocean, what you do is you pre-position it in a handful of places, pre-position extra gear so that the ship leaves and then they fly over and they fall in on the gear and they're fine. But one of the things you have to do is you have to do preventative maintenance on that stuff, right? Just like you can't just let your car sit for 2 years. So the Russians are finding out the problems now with letting big military equipment sit and not rotating the tires and stuff like that. So you have to do all that stuff. And also, when you're going to take it out of storage and start using it, there's things you need to do to sort of, bring it out of suspended animation. And so they put a number of guys on board specifically to do all that stuff. And so when you put the Marines on board and all the other people that would do that stuff, how many people would that be?
106, what they called OPP, or offload preparation personnel.
Okay. So they end up putting like more than more than twice as many people as would normally be the ship's company complement.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So here's what we're going to do. These are basically the ideas on the left-hand side. Those areas are sort of like how I've broken it down. I can't remember if I did them in that order or not, but that's basically what I broke it down into. And then I'm just going to basically go through some pictures on all these different things, and I'll tell you why I think it's important, and then Peter will correct me, and Peter will tell you what things are, etc. But we're looking at here, aside from a sign that basically says "close and lock the door behind you" so that the waterproofing works. Are some ship's drawings. I wish I had taken better pictures of them, but you can get a pretty good idea of what the profile of the ship looks like. And the one on the lower left, if you look real carefully, you can see the ramps. Ramps are a big deal because the way that you get, these are basically roll-on, roll-off ships. The way that you get everything on board and off the ship is you drive it. So it comes in through a ramp on the stern and it goes down into the hold, down a series of ramps. It's basically you were chief engineer in a parking garage, right?
Yeah.
It was just a parking garage that happened to go from one place to another.
Yeah. 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 And what's in the cargo hold really was mostly not my problem.
As long as it's secured.
Yep.
Because if it's not secured, it becomes everybody's problem.
Yep. Yep. So the picture on the lower left is a modern one.
Okay.
That was after the U.S. government bought it. The one on the right is one of the original posters for when the ship was built in Germany.
You know, one of the things I regret is that I don't think I took a picture of any of the bars, because it was a German ship, and you know, Germans like beer. And so all the, staterooms had bars. There's a bar here, there's a bar there. There were just like little bars all over the ship. It was really kind of interesting. Not the sort of thing you see in a Navy ship. It is the sort of thing that you'd see in like an Italian ship. In the officer's wardroom on British warships serves alcohol, but the U.S. merchant ships are dry, right?
Legally, yes.
That's a very interesting answer, which I'm not going to pull the thread on.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is what it looks like Pierside as we're sort of coming up to it. And so these are all sort of from the back, and you can see that ramp. And I wish I had a good overhead view of that ramp, because the ramp, if I remember correctly, the ramp goes to starboard, right?
Correct.
So
Correct.
It's the back of the ship is really interesting. It's not squared off. It's at an angle because of that ramp. So it's the weirdest aft end of a ship I've ever seen. It violates all the rules of being symmetrical. So literally the ship is longer. If you measure the length of the ship on one side, it is longer than it is if you measure the length of the ship on the other side. So, and one of the things that you'll notice, we were on board the ship long enough. When we got there, it was sort of mid-afternoonish, but by the time that we left, it was getting pretty dark. So you can sort of tell, when we were at various places by where the shadows are and what the light level is.
Yeah. So the lower left-hand corner, I believe that ship has just gotten pulled out down to Brownsville.
Okay. The one behind it?
Well, no, the one close. The close one's not the Martin.
Oh, it's not.
No. Nope. That's an old Maersk.
You're right. I just took a picture of another ship because I thought it was cool. All right.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, because it's all gray. Yeah, because the Martin had that white superstructure, whereas the ship next to it was gray.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and if you look on the top left-hand corner, you see the Martin on the right and that other ship on the left.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. So let's go down a little bit more. Now, these are just sort of general topside views. I'm going to point out a couple of things that I find particularly interesting here. And you'll note this is not my normal slide format, and that's because PowerPoint has this wonderful feature that if you just throw a bunch of photos on a PowerPoint slide, it'll give you like a, hey, do you want me to arrange them in this way? It'll give you a bunch of different options. And so I basically, stylistically, I chose this particular option. It does mean that it cuts a few things off. It crops a few things. And I just realized it. The picture on the right, far right lower picture is a picture of a spare ship's propeller. And that might be kind of hard to see because it cropped part of it off. The Martin did indeed travel around with an extra propeller on its sitting on the deck, sort of locked in place, so that if they had to do, if they broke a blade on the propeller or the propeller fell off, sometimes happens. If something like that happened, they had another propeller handy and they wouldn't have to like sit in a port and wait for 3 years for a new propeller to show up. So that's pretty cool. Second thing I'll point out in that middle picture, it's probably not immediately apparent what that is to anybody who doesn't know what it is, but that sort of rusted thing on the left-hand side, if I remember correctly, that's a grill, right?
Yes. Yes. Homemade barbecue.
So that's what we're looking at, the barbecue station. So, which is a pretty nifty idea. And, every Navy warship I've been on has at least one grill on board, and they'll do something called a Steel Beach picnic. And they'll play basketball on the flight deck. They'll play volleyball on the flight deck, and they put the volleyball itself in this net bag that's attached with a tether. With the basketball, they just sort of like trust that people will be able to get to the ball before it goes off the flight deck and into the water. But with the volleyball, they have a tether on it, which, as you can imagine, it's not a particularly good volleyball game when you've got your when there's a physical rope attached to the volleyball. Yeah. The other thing I'll point out, because it was just such a cool thing, on that middle one on the left, you can't really see it on that photo, but that's a set of stairs, what in the Navy we would call a ladder, that goes from the fairly high up on the ship, because the ship's riding high in the water, and going down to the Pierside. Now, why am I taking a picture of some stairs? Well, those stairs are designed to work at whatever draft the ship is at, right? Because the ship can be heavily loaded, in which case it's riding low in the water. It can be riding high. The tide might be in, the tide might be out. So sometimes the top of that ladder is going to be, 30 feet off the deck? 30 feet off?
More.
Or more.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's going to be a lot lower off the pier side. So the steps are not flat. The steps are all curves, so that at whatever angle that ladder is at, you've got a step that you can step on. Now, they're weird.
Yeah.
I don't know. Did you ever get used to going up and down those things?
A little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I had both hands on the handrail, because the contact area between your foot and the stair is quite small. The stair is like, what, probably 12 inches if you flattened it out.
Yeah, probably, but it's curved, so you really only get a couple inches of grip.
Yeah, you got like 2 inches of grip, like right in the center of your foot. So it's not at the front of your foot. It's not at the back of your foot. It's really kind of in the center. Because I remember going up, if I remember correctly, was a little bit easier, but you didn't want to, usually on a Navy ladder, because the stairs aren't very deep and they're very steep. When you're going up, you're walking on the front part of your foot, and when you're coming down, you're walking on your heels. And that's because if you're coming down and you're not walking on your heels, you're banging your Achilles tendon into the stair in front of you. I remember the first time I went to sea, it's like, why do my Achilles tendons hurt so much? And I realized it's because I was trying to put too much of my foot on the stair. But either way, you're either on your heels or you're on the front of your feet. On this thing, I was constantly, if I tried to put the front of my foot on it, it felt like it was going to slide off. If I tried to put the back of my foot on it, coming down, it felt like it was going to slide off. And so I really sort of tried to center it. So, it's funny how hard it is to do something simple, like get on and off the ship.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's see. Moving on.
Hold on. Let's see.
Okay.
All right. So, you see the barbecue grill.
Yep.
And you've got a level below that you could just sort of hang out in if you wanted to.
Okay.
Right behind the grill, basically to your left, is where the officers' lounge and the galley is.
Okay.
So it's actually very conveniently placed for when they do food service. They don't have to trundle all sorts of stuff out to some other place to cook for a Steel Beach party.
Oh, okay. And that blue thing's a table, if I remember correctly, right?
I believe so. Probably.
Yeah. Oh, and I should point out that you see a lot of rust here and stuff like that. Peter's company.
Don't say the name.
I'm not going to say the name, but I am going to point out they took over this ship. They had not had this ship for very long when I was on board. So one should not, Peter was the engineer on this ship. One should not look at things like all that rust and say, blame Peter for it, because he inherited that. He inherited that rust. So, okay, I'm going to move on. So here's the bridge. If you look in the photo on the right, on the left-hand side of that far right-hand photo, you see the ship's wheel. And then you can see that would be the throttle next to the orange thing, right?
Yeah, it's basically right next to my back.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the throttle. And
then it looks like you've got a periscope.
Magnetic compass up on top of the bridge.
Okay.
So you can see the magnetic compass well down below. It is a periscope, but it's a periscope field style, just to be able to see around a corner.
Makes sense. And so, if you ever go and visit any old ships, you'll see that there's a magnetic compass, and then there's usually like a couple of big metal balls on arms around it. And I always wondered, what's with the big metal balls? And the answer is that that's how you sort of like calibrate the compass. You move those metal balls, you figure out which direction is north, and you move the metal balls until the compass reads correctly. Did I get that right?
Basically, yeah. It compensates for all the steel in the ship itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's funny. We use magnets inside a ship to detect the magnetic field outside the ship, and there's issues there.
Yeah.
But they're able to make it work.
Yep.
So when you're at sea on this ship, how many people would be on the bridge?
3.
Okay. And you'd have like, in the Navy, it would be officer of the deck. Is that what they call it in a merchant ship?
Nope, mate on watch.
Mate on watch.
Yep.
You've got a helmsman, right?
Yeah, AB. Yep.
And then a lookout,
who's either an ordinary or another AB. So you
Okay.
could have 3 to 4 people on watch.
Okay. When you're coming into port, what would be normal?
Captain will be up there. Probably be another mate. And maybe one more AB or ordinary. But
So
not very many.
About 6 or 7.
Yeah. It gets a little bit crowded.
Yeah, 6 or 7 is about what's normal on a U.S. Navy destroyer. You'd have a lookout on either side. You'd have a quartermaster of the watch. You've got an officer of the deck. You've got a conning officer. You might have a junior officer of the deck who's an officer under instruction. And then if you've got a Bright Bridge radar operator there too. So that gets you to 7 pretty easily. And that's like making the assumption that like the quartermaster isn't training somebody. Oh, helm. Did I say helm? I don't think I said helm. That gets you to 8.
Oh, yeah. Plus, you'd probably have the Navy would have somebody that just runs the throttle.
Usually not when you're just like tooling around in the middle of the night. If you're doing an evolution like coming into port, or you're doing an underway replenishment, then you have a lee helm, which is the guy that runs the throttles. And you might think to yourself like, okay, you've got these throttles to the, like, why can't you, I can drive a stick shift. I can shift and drive the car at the same time. Why do you need a separate guy in the throttles? The answer is that it's a little bit harder than that, because to some degree your turns have to be more precise. And also it's the case that you don't have a speedometer. You set the throttles to a given throttle setting that will produce a given speed, and you need to look that up. There's a chart there. So I'm not trying to make it sound like both of these guys are insanely busy, but it is one of those things that, like, if something happens and you go from being not particularly busy to busy, you really want the other guy there, especially in something like an underway replenishment where because a collision at sea can ruin your whole day. So.
Yeah. You might also have another person up there, depending upon the ship. If you've got 1 or 2 bow thrusters and or stern thrusters, you might have another person running those.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Coming in and out of port is one of those things that it's easy overtime, and it's a heck of a lot better to have an extra body up there.
Yeah.
Than find out that, oops, somebody hit the wrong lever or couldn't do 2 levers at once. Or,
oops, we've accidentally left the channel and now we're run aground and we can't get off. Not that could ever happen.
Yeah.
Chesapeake Bay.
Yeah. Well, like the thing with the throttle, somebody just didn't know how to shift between throttle and helm on the control system.
Is that what happened?
That was the McCain.
Oh, yeah. They had that. Yeah. That was bad. That system was not well designed.
No, user interface issues.
Yeah. Okay, so here's some of the common areas. There's a little ship's library. There's the galley area there. One of the things, I don't think you can see it. I don't think I quite captured it, but when I first walked by, there's a plate, like a full meal with saran wrap over it. And that's because somebody on watch needed to have a dinner, and the galley crew was going home, so they just left a dinner sitting out for whoever it was on watch. I'll note that Peter and I walked around the ship. We were on board for what, 3 hours?
Oh, at least.
Yeah. We walked around and we never ran into another person. In 3 hours, we never ran into another person. And I think I asked you, how many people do you think are on board right now? And you said probably like 5 or 6.
Probably, yeah. Maybe not even that many. But I mean, at the end, there was probably down to 1.
Yeah, that would make sense because we got out of there at like around 7, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
but it's a big ship, and people are. It's like it's a building. It's a building, and there were 5 people in the building, and we didn't see any of the other 5 people. Okay, so these are a couple of different areas, I think. What are we looking at here, Peter?
Okay, lower left is OPP or Marine Corps food serving area.
Okay.
I remember that because of the covered table in the back. Upper left is unlicensed crew.
Okay.
Fixed seating. Upper center, same location, just a little bit different angle. And upper right is also
marine stuff.
Marine. Yeah, marine food.
Okay. And you can see in that middle one that there's peanut butter out, there's cereal, there's bread.
Yep.
That sort of stuff. It looks like a lot of jars of Skippy if I'm reading that right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's standard on Navy ships too. You'll go into the wardroom and they usually serve 4 meals a day because there's usually a mid-rats one that's right around midnight. And then there'll be food out for people that aren't able to catch an actual meal so that they can come in and like make a sandwich or something like that. Okay. How about these areas?
Okay, this is the officers' eating area. So you can see upper right and bottom left is the sitting area. It's the lounge. If you were to turn around 180 degrees from the bottom left, you'd see the bar.
Okay.
Okay. And then we had 2 tables in the officers' lounge. I don't know why we had 2. The second round one might have been an add-on when the ship was converted, so that we could have like the Marine Corps officers eat with us instead of them eating with the enlisted back aft. But they probably would have been sitting over there. But the center one is the regular officers' table.
Okay.
So.
All right.
Yep. More crew area. For the one on the right, they're almost repeats.
Yeah.
The upper left and upper center is the Marine lounge, Marine Corps lounge.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So I need to take. Is that lounge for enlisted or a lounge for officers?
Enlisted.
Yeah.
The Marine stuff is all. I don't think there was a special Marine Corps officer lounge.
Yeah, there's probably only like 2 or 3 of them on board tops. And so I wouldn't expect it. Okay. At some point I'm going to reorganize this to put all the Marine stuff together. I had totally forgotten the Marines had their own area.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So this is Peatland.
Yep.
So.
Yep. All right. So, not the left-hand side is not a very good angle, but that's one part of my stateroom. So king or queen size, I think. Queen size bed that you can walk around on 2 sides. which is kind of nice. A lot of ships, even though you get the big bed, it's up against a bulkhead. Top center is the disaster that was my desk area. All the tech manuals and paperwork I have to deal with on a regular basis. Not sure what the far right photo is.
It appears to be. I was going to say it's over by the printer. It might, that might have been in another space. I just thought it was your office.
No, that's mine. It is my office. Ship's particulars, probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you had a lounge. So the layout of this for everybody, basically, you came in. If I remember correctly, you came in through a door that was to the left of that office area. And then you'd have your office like off to the left, and then that lounge area from the lower left-hand corner would be directly in front of you, and the door to your bedroom would be to the right, and then the head was you'd get to through the bedroom.
Yes.
And so this actually, so you might, it's like this is an awful lot of space, but this is one of the things that you'll see on Navy ships too. That lounge area, that it isn't just that he's the engineer and as a result he gets a big living room. What you're looking at is his meeting space for his guys. So if he needs to have a meeting, they'll come up to there and they'll sit on those couches, and that's where he has a meeting.
Yeah.
So like on a U.S. Navy vessel, like say on a DDG, the captain has a 2-room stateroom like that. So he's got an office with a couch on it, and then he's got his bedroom area. The XO on a DDG has a couch that folds down into a bed. So he's only got one room, but it's a big room with some extra seating capacity in it because he has lots of meetings in his space. And then everybody else, all the other officers, they're generally in rooms that have the senior officers are in rooms that have 2 beds. They'll be bunk style beds, but there may only be one of them assigned in that office, and they've each got their own desk area with a computer. There may only be one in there, but there's 2 computers, 2 desk areas, and that's their primary workspace. So they've got a department, and their department has a departmental office, and they'll go down to that department, etc. And that's where the enlisted guys work. But the officer, he's basically filling, if he's not down there doing his stuff, and he shouldn't be down there all the time because that's why he's got a chief, right? He goes down, says, "Chief, I need you to do X." Chief says, "Yes, sir." And he turns around and goes back to doing paperwork in his office and gets out of the chief's way and lets the chief do it. And so he's filling out his, his primary work area is in his living space. Something that seemed quite alien to me before COVID, but I'm sitting, if I rotate like this, I'm sitting at my work computer.
Yeah. Okay. Just scanning one of the comments, because nobody seemed to have called them out. We really couldn't do underwear replenishment. I guess they could have sent it. We probably could have rigged something up if we had to. But
you weren't trained for it. And
no.
It's not something, you didn't have the standard gear for it.
No.
Yeah.
No.
So, and that's an important thing. You do underway replenishment with ships that are going to go be at sea, and they're just going to hang out at sea for a while, right? This isn't the sort of ship that hangs out at sea. This is the sort of ship that hangs out in ports, and then they'll get an order that says, when it was a pre-positioning ship, take your stuff, go here and unload it. When it was sitting in the Norfolk area as sort of a hot spare, ready to pick up an Army unit or a Marine unit if they need to take it someplace, right? It's sitting there waiting for the call, but when it gets the call, it goes someplace, loads all the gear, gets as much fuel as it needs, goes to where it's going to deliver that gear, drops it all off.
Right. And it may have to refuel somewhere's sort of close to the zone, wherever that is. So if we were, say, sending stuff from California to North to Korea, you may want to refuel on the way out in Japan.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. So yeah.
Okay, so here's the engine room. Now, if you look to the this was utterly fascinating to me. And I'm going to go ahead and describe it, and then Peter's going to tell me what I get wrong. On the right-hand side, you'll see Peter with his feet on the floor, standing next to something else that's sitting on the floor. And is that the cylinder, or is that the cylinder sleeve?
Basically the same thing. It's one of the cylinder liners.
So it's a cylinder liner from one of the from the diesel engine.
Yep.
So that tells you how big the piston is in the cylinder of this in this diesel engine. The piston is big enough that the sleeve that it moves in is that size. If you look in that center photo, if you look carefully, you can sort of see there's a cylinder with some stuff on the top, including a bunch of cabling and wires and stuff coming out of it. And then you go back a little bit, and there's another one of those. And then you go back a little bit, and there's another one of those. Right in the middle, paralleling the two big cylinder, the big cylinder and the little cylinder that are off to the left, paralleling that, there's a line of 3 vertical cylinders. Those are the piston housings, right?
Those are the cylinder heads, yeah.
Cylinder heads. Yeah,
the big cylinders that you're seeing, the green ones, that's the air. That's for the air in and air out. Yeah.
But so that cylinder liner there that you're seeing on the right-hand side, the right-hand photo, this diesel engine had 3 cylinders, right?
7. You're only seeing 3 at the moment. There's actually 7.
Oh, okay. Where are the other ones?
I think it's just the angle of the photo and the size of the photo.
Okay, so there's just a line of 7 of them.
Yeah, it's a straight 7.
So the part that just it just amazed me when I saw this. This is like, in a car, you've got an engine block, and all this stuff is sort of carved into the engine block. In this, there is no engine block. The engine room is the functional equivalent of the engine block. We were walking around inside the engine block.
Not really. But you're able to walk around the engine block.
Yeah. Okay. We're able to walk around the engine block, but I mean, my point is that the cylinders that you can be standing in between 2 of the cylinders on the diesel engine while just standing in between them with your hands touching them.
Yeah, while it's running. I actually had a classmate on a different style engine. He did valve lash while the engine was running.
Was that a good thing or a bad thing?
They were going slow, so they could do it. Our top speed was, I think, 120 revolutions per minute.
Okay. So what was it that he did?
He did valve lash. He measured the distance between one of the cams and the valve follower.
So he basically stuck a ruler into a piece of moving machinery.
Yeah, depth gauge or feeler gauge, because he knew he could do it, just to prove it could be done.
Boy, that really sounds like a hold my beer moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you look on that upper left-hand photo, you can see that maybe a little bit clearer what we're looking at there. So, but in any event, that's the engine room.
One part of it.
One part of it. Yeah. It was, if I remember correctly, it was tough there wasn't any place that you could stand where you could sort of like get the entire thing in the camera lens.
No, not really. I'll have to look through and see if I have any better photos.
Okay. So this is sort of like the engineering plant control room, right?
Yes. Yeah. Engineer. Yeah.
What is it called?
Main control station.
Okay.
MCS.
On a DDG, it's called, and I think on a Tycho class cruiser too, it's central control station, if I remember correctly, the equivalent. So there, main engineering. Scotty would hang out in the central control station. So,
yeah. So,
but it's it's
yeah.
So, I love the color of the paint job in there, because it's almost exactly the same color that the Russians used to paint the inside of their fighter cockpits.
Okay. So lower left is local control, or is engine room control for the throttle.
Okay.
So you can see a throttle box there. A couple of telephones and gauges tell you what's going on with the engine. Upper left is generator and fan control, so power systems.
Okay.
And ventilation power. We used more power for ventilation when we were loading and offloading than we did for anything else.
Oh yeah, because you've got a lot of gasoline powered or diesel powered vehicles that are starting their engines in enclosed spaces where there are humans.
Yes. 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 Yeah. Yeah. And then far right is, I believe, ballast control.
Okay. Making sure everything stays even keeled. That throttle control, the throttle up on the bridge, is that a direct control, or is it just a telegraph sending signals down to you?
Direct control.
Okay. So you have throttles also, but the mate on duty, when he's adjusting it, when the sailor on duty, when he's adjusting it, he's actually controlling the engines directly.
Correct. We have the ability to override and just take control if we have to.
Okay. But it took me forever to figure out. You'd see all these steamship old movies, etc. Right? It took me forever to figure out what exactly that engine control is. And so for people who don't know, that's not a control, that's a telegraph. And so if you look at it, there's the big handle on the top that goes back, and you go back and forth to make the bell ring so that they hear the bell on the other end, and then you put it to where it's going, where you want the setting to be. And back in engineering, they see on the inner dial, they see the needle move, and then it will stop, and they hear the bell ring, so they know to pay attention to it, and they'll see it stop at a place. And then when they answer the bell, they then, so they're basically saying, yes, I see that that's what you want, and I'm going to give you that. They do the same thing with their telegraph, and up on the bridge, that inner gauge moves. And so if everybody's on the same page, the outer handle that you control and the inner dial that they control, regardless of which who and which they you're talking about, they should be matched up.
Yes.
Now, when you were on steamships, did they have an engine telegraph like that? Or were they sort of direct control?
No, none of the, well, the Cape May, I believe, was set up for direct control, but we never used it.
Okay.
Yeah. Early automation, I'm not sure if it was still working at the time, or if anybody really trusted it. So
I could see that. Now, it's, steam plants take a while to sort of spin up and stuff like that. It's not like pushing down the throttle on your car when you get a pretty direct response right away. So that's one of the things that's changed when they went to gas turbines and in the civilian fleet when they went to diesels, is that you get a lot faster response from the engines. I remember one of the CO of USS Porter was talking about, because he had spent some time on steamships early in his career, and he talked about how when you're doing the breakaway after you're doing the unwrap, it would take a while for you to sort of like pull away from it. But now with gas turbines, you just put the throttles forward and you go. And there's this concept called the breakaway song, where you play a song back to the ship. The Navy spends an inordinate amount of time planning what music they're going to play during underway replenishments across the big loudspeakers to each other. And so he made the comment about how in the old days you could get through like most of a song as you sort of creeped away, and these days you're basically out of earshot within the by the end of the first verse. So, okay, more engineering. So I love the lockout stuff. So why don't you explain what lockouts are real quick?
Okay, so if you are going to use anything that has stored energy in it, and that or electricity, you need to prevent that from accidentally releasing or somebody stupidly releasing it while you have your hands inside. So you put a lock that has only a single key available, and you put a tag on the lock saying who has the key and who authorized it and why, or at least where to go in the notebook that tells you all this stuff, and prevents people from closing breakers, starting motors, moving equipment around. So you do have to make sure they're clear as to who has it, and that's why there's only one key.
Makes sense. So I know from personal experience that if you're going to be electrocuted, you want that to be a conscious decision that somebody made on purpose. So I can't honestly say that I know what the aftermath of being electrocuted is like. I was indeed sedated when they electrocuted me, so I didn't actually get to feel the electrocution. Although, if it wasn't for the fact that they had to run an ultrasound probe down my throat first before they could electrocute me, I would have said, "Hey, do you have to sedate me for this? When else am I going to get the opportunity to be electrocuted?" But as it was, I didn't want to be awake when they ran the thing down my throat. So, a technical term is electrical cardioversion, by the way. Okay, so this is just more general panels. Is there anything special here worth calling out?
Upper left-hand corner, the green piece, K-Pack, that is the anti-corrosion that prevents the steel from interacting with other steel and non-steel and just basically eroding in the salt water.
So it's an active protection system.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
So anybody who owns a boat, there's little sacrificial anodes that you put on the boat that are usually made out of zinc, if I remember correctly. Yes. And that's because when you put a piece of metal in the water, it will create a small current and it will basically dissolve your boat. So the ocean wants to dissolve your boat, so you give it something to dissolve instead of your boat. It's sort of I was going to say it's like the physics equivalent of a sacrifice to the gods.
Yes. Just remember though that if your boat is made out of aluminum, and you put a piece of zinc in there,
it won't work.
The zinc will sacrifice itself to save the aluminum will sacrifice itself to save the zinc.
Yeah, and so that specifically happened on one of the LCS classes, the Literal Combat Ship, the LCS 2 class. They wanted the manufacturer said, look, you really want an active protection system, because that thing that Peter's got, the one I described with the zinc anode, that's a passive protection system. This one actually is an electrified piece of a current, and it does something with electricity to negate all that stuff. But it's a more expensive system, and it requires maintenance, and it's got wires everywhere and stuff like that. And so it costs more money than just putting zinc anodes on. And so the manufacturer said, you need an active protection system. The Navy said, no, we can get by with a passive protection system. And so in effect, the Navy built a water-soluble boat. Bold move, Cotton. Let's see how this one works out for them. It did not work out well. The first time they pulled that hull out of the water to do a yard period on it, that had like big gaping holes in the hull. It was really bad.
Yeah, apparently they lost 20 tons of aluminum.
Wow. On a ship that had like been in the water for 6 months.
Yeah, and it's only a 1,700 ton ship, I believe.
Yeah. There were huge. Basically, the part of the ship was made out of steel, but the hull was made out of metal. And when you put steel and aluminum together like that, it creates a current, and it just sort of dissolved the aluminum. It was bad. Yeah. You can see the photos online. Okay, so here's the hold. Now there's a bunch of stuff in the hold because they were doing a bunch of work there. In fact, I can't remember when I was there, had they yet decided that they were going to decommission the ship?
I don't think so.
I don't think they had either. They had realized that they had more, that the engine maintenance problem was going to be non-trivial, and that it was going to cost them a lot of money to fix. But I don't think that they had actually decided that it wasn't worth fixing. So you can see in the upper left-hand corner, and even better, well, actually, in 3 out of these 4, you can see that there are ramps. What is probably easiest to see in that third one, the far right-hand one, is the fact that you've got 2 ramps there, actually, because there is you've got a ramp, and then you've got a basically a deck that comes down to form a door.
Yes.
So you drive all your stuff down to the lowest level, you park it very close to each other, you chain it all down as you need to chain it down. We'll look at you can see the chain holes in the far left-hand side, the X things where they put those allow them to put chains in those X's, and they can lock stuff down. And then in the far right-hand side, what you're looking at is basically a big door that comes down and seals it off that you can then park stuff on. Yeah. So now,
if you look at the center photo,
yeah,
you can see that door that's for the far right photo. In the background, you can see how there's some stuff sitting on the ramp.
Yeah.
Okay, you can see it's at an angle. Vertical angle. Yeah. So that's the part that
comes down.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yep.
And so the end result of this is you can pack these ships pretty tight. There's places where it's a triangular shaped, wedge shaped space. And so you don't park your tall stuff there, because then the door will come down on top of it. But they're really good about being able to pack all this stuff together. Here's some of the things in the floor. The X's are for chains. You'll see that there's also these oval-shaped ones. The oval-shaped ones, if I remember correctly, are designed specifically for use with containers, right?
No. It's all, I believe that's just another way of doing for chains.
Oh, okay. I thought that was the container locking mechanism.
No, those are going to be separate. Yeah. Yeah. I can't remember because I haven't done a lot of active RoRo stuff where I've had to deal with the cargo side.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I don't think you even put stuff in there. There's other places you'd put it in. I'll take a look at it on Monday.
Okay.
Because I'm on a row again still.
But you can see on the lower left-hand corner, that's at the very bottom of the ramp. And so when that ramp comes down and seals it, it just looks like it's deck. In the upper right-hand corner, you can see a big door that sort of splits off, shuts down two different parts of the hold. Because, if you're flooding, you want to minimize that as much as possible.
Yeah, that and fire protection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The hangar deck of an aircraft carrier, for instance, has two great big fire doors that will split it into thirds. And each one of those sections of the hangar deck has its own control station up on the wall up high, so that they've got a place where they can have like somebody looking over the hangar deck and giving orders to the guys that are fighting the fire. So these German ships were built with an owner's stateroom.
Yep.
So, and I think you told me that occasionally you'd end up with a senior officer who would be on the ship for some reason, right? Like I want to say it was a port officer doing an inspection or something.
Yeah, port engineer. If you had an ABS surveyor, not on this class, this type, but on an oil tanker, you might have a surveyor. There's another room, I believe. I think there was another room just for the pilot. So if you were going through the North Sea,
okay,
and the pilot's going to have to be on there for a couple of days, but there's huge periods when he's not really needed.
Okay.
Or there'd be two of them. So, but yeah, so if you're carrying somebody moderately special, I mean, we're not going to be carrying the President of the United States, but, if we had an admiral that had to be on board, we could put him in there.
Yeah.
So
on like a DDG, you frequently have the captain actually has two staterooms. On most ships, the Navy ships, the captain has two staterooms. He's got one, his in-port cabin, which is actually where he is most of the time. And it's sort of down in the bowels of the ship. And then he's got a cabin that's right off the bridge that is just the essentials. It's a bunk and a small head, etc. And frequently on exercises that I'd be on, like if there was a reservist on board, a senior reservist, he'd get that cabin. Because you end up with a whole bunch of extra people. We're almost done, I think. So
yeah.
There's some workshop stuff. So, lathes and other stuff like that.
Yep.
Lots of spare part storage.
Yep. Make Eric Flint drool.
Yes. Yeah. This is the sort of stuff that you'd want to go back. If you had to go back to the 1600s, you'd want to take this space with you.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of stateroom stuff. So my guess is this is Marines.
Yes.
And you'll note that there's orange survival suits laid out because that's not standard operating gear for the Marines to have a survival suit. So the ship has survival suits for them, and they laid them out there so that when they come to their rack, there's one waiting for them.
Also makes the inspection easier. So if you have to do the inspection, there's no sense pulling it out of the bag, rolling it back up, putting it in the bag, knowing that you're not going to have to touch it for another 6 months. Just leave it out.
Yeah, and then the next time you have to touch it, you're going to have to do the exact same thing again.
Yeah. So
makes sense. So this is ship's company, right?
Yes. And this looks like, I can't tell if it's an officer's or unlicensed.
Yeah, I remember when we were going through here, there was a lot of work being done in these spaces. And as a result, it was sort of hard to find, there were two different kinds of staterooms on board that ship. ones that were sort of kind of torn up because they were doing work in them, and ones that were actually people's living areas, and as a result the door was closed and we certainly weren't going to go in there.
Right. Yeah.
That is one of the things to always keep in mind if you're doing a ship tour, is like I remember at some point somebody asked on one of the first ship tours I did when I was at CNA, like, can we see living spaces? And the answer was no, they're living spaces. It's like going into somebody's house, right? You know, they didn't invite you into their house. So we got to see combat. We got to see all this other stuff. We didn't get to go see the living spaces. Okay, this I think is the last slide. So we got a couple of passageways.
Yep. Yeah, I think I described them at the time as Hollywood passageways.
Oh, because they're so wide.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. If the ceilings were taller, they could be passageways on the sea view from Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea.
Yeah.
Upper left-hand corner, if I remember correctly, is like part of the sick bay, right?
Yes, looks like it. Yeah. Yeah. And same with the top center.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's the last one. No. Oh, no. We got some lifeboat stuff.
Lifeboat stuff.
A couple of lifeboat slides.
Yep.
So the lower left-hand corner, that is an illustration I pulled off the internet. All the others are photos taken by me. You see Peter has already climbed into the lifeboat. So this is what you see when you look through one of those doors on the side. You've got a bench there with some safety straps so you can strap yourself in. There's a bench in the middle that sort of goes around, and then there's a bench around the outside of people facing in. I think you told me 40 people on these. Is that right?
I believe so. I'd have to look up the data some. Yeah.
Yeah. So 40-ish people. You've got a control station at the aft, and that's a raised platform. So in the middle there, what you're looking at is the wheel because it's got a little putt-putt engine in it. And basically it's like you climb up into this area, and I think you've got a seat up there if I remember correctly, but you're basically sitting, your feet are about like even with everybody else's chest, right? When they're sitting.
Yeah. Chest or shoulder.
Yeah. And so you've got a 360 view out of the small windows there, and you're just sort of sitting up there in control.
Yep.
Oh, and the bench there, as you can see, there's those circular things there. If I remember correctly, those are like lids that you can take off because there's gear in those benches.
Yeah.
And so there's like a water tank, and there's some other all sorts of other stuff in there. So the one on the upper right is the bow of this thing. As you can see, it sort of curves around. You can't see the bench, but the bench is immediately below the straps on the right-hand side. So what you're looking at is to the right is the center portion, to the left is the portion going around the outside.
Yeah.
And as you can see, when I say bench, I mean bench. It's just metal bench. So
fiberglass.
Yeah. Not cushioned.
No, you strap yourself in and just hope. At least this isn't a free fall lifeboat. We don't just pull it and go. It actually lowers
slowly, as opposed to just like, you don't eject.
Yeah.
But if you're in the lifeboat and the lifeboat's in the water, you're already having a bad day.
Yeah.
I think there's one more. Nope, that was it.
Yep.
So Lissa, why don't you come on? We didn't get a chance to talk to you.
Oh, hi.
So very quickly, because we did run long again today. But how's your week been?
Exhausting, but good.
I understand. I'm actually in the process of prepping to do a professional wargaming conference, as you well know, because Lissa's going to give me a hand on that. because we're doing it on StreamYard, YouTube. You know, everybody here knows exactly how we're going to do it. It's called Connections Online. I'm the founder. I'm the guy putting it together. I've been, about the time where it started heating up, some stuff in the day job started heating up too. And so like I should have spent all day today working on Connections Online, but I really didn't. I was getting caught up in some other stuff. So tomorrow it's going to be all Connections Online all the time. So,
Fair enough.
but
Yeah, she is sweet kitty.
oh yes, yes. So I'm going to try to go back. I didn't get a chance to really look at any of the comments, but I'm going to try to go back through the Aries Studio comments and add them to the list of many, many things that I need to do comments on. I've been trying to do comments respond to comments as they come in. And I've been pretty good the last couple of episodes, but this one is not going to happen. So
yeah, seeing a couple of ones. John 42 about the Gumby suits. He said they do them every quarter. We're in reduced operating status, so we don't do some of the safety inspections for gear that's only used underway.
That probably means you've got a longer list of things you need to do to prep to get underway then, right?
Yes, the first time when they say get underway, there's an awful lot, there's usually a lot of catch up to do.
Okay.
You know,
but that's planned.
Yes, that's planned. So, 140 survival suits, or 100 extra survival suits for people that aren't assigned to the ship. No, we don't have to check those every quarter. But the ones for the crew, where if we actually got underway, yes, we would. So
makes sense.
Yeah,
sense to me. So. All right. I don't think I've got anything else other than perhaps a desire to do some sleeping.
That's a mood.
Yeah.
So, all right. So I think we're ready to call it. Thank you to everybody who comes on a weekly basis and comes and visits us. I just realized that I don't think I quite say thank you enough for that. I appreciate the fact that people could be doing stuff. There's a lot of stuff that people could be doing. Everybody who's watching us is almost by definition sitting in front of their computer, or they got their smartphone, or et cetera, et cetera. In other words, you are connected to everything that is the internet, and you've got the sum total of human knowledge at your fingertips, and you've chosen to spend an hour and a half with us here. And so that's worth saying thank you. So thank you to everybody who comes and spends time, and I greatly appreciate it. And if I didn't, I wouldn't be here. So thank you very much. And with that, have a good weekend, everybody, and have a good week, and see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.